Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. My name is Nathan. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. So, for my regular listeners, you'll probably know that I normally only cover movies that are underrated, old, maybe not really in the public eye all that much. This week, I decided to break that rule entirely because we're going to be looking at some Denis Villeneuve movies, specifically Dune Part 2, which is still out in theaters, and I'm breaking the rules, and I was the only one who set the rules, so it doesn't really matter. I'm doing it. It's my show. Whatever. Mostly, it's also because this is the last What to Watch Wednesdays of the quarter, and so I decided, who cares if I mix things up? Who cares if I really just try something different every once in a while? It kind of avoids the repetition, so we're just going to go with it. So, tonight we are going to be taking a look at Blade Runner 2049 from 2017, Dune Part 1 from 2021, and Dune Part 2 from this year, 2024. So stick around for Blade Runner after the break. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our first movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at Blade Runner 2049 from 2017, available to watch on Hulu. So I should kind of mention very quickly that in my notes for this movie, I listed it as Blade Runner 2042 for some reason. I think I just forgot how to count, but I haven't forgotten how to speak quite yet. So I'm going to jump into the plot of the movie. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the story of Blade Runner 2049, it takes place 30 years after the events of the original Blade Runner from the 80s, directed by Ridley Scott. This movie is directed by Denis Villeneuve, so it could have a possibility of being like, oh, it's a new director. Maybe they messed up. Don't worry, they didn't. But just keep that in mind. About 30 years after the fact, a current replicant runner by the name of K, yes, it's just K, played by Ryan Gosling, finds the remains of Sarah, a kind of significant replicant from the first movie that Rick Deckard fell in love with, the original character, like the original main character of the first movie, and decides to track down Rick Deckard so that he can get some answers to the burning mystery of what actually happened between you two, what's the answer to our burning questions. Now, I could go into the plot a little further than that, but I think I should really emphasize right now that everything I just said is heavily reliant on you understanding anything about the first movie, any of the terminology used in the Blade Runner universe, and having any interest in the Blade Runner universe to begin with. Because things like replicants, runners, just calling him K, like Sarah, Rick, none of that means anything to you if you've never seen the original Blade Runner. So before I recommend this movie or say anything positive or negative about it, keep in mind that I personally believe you cannot watch this movie without having seen the original or reading up the basic plot of it, which I would kind of strongly recommend against doing, because why are you just reading the plot summary when you can watch the movie instead and get the plot from the movie? Although I will say that the plot of Blade Runner in it of itself does require some reading if you really want to grasp it on your first watch. On the second time around, like if you're not reading anything, you'd probably get it after a couple watches. If you want to get it all in the first run, you can easily read up the plot summary and just go, okay, I know what's going to happen, or I know like the basics of it. Don't read the entire thing. Don't read the entire thing and then pretend like you've watched the movie, is my point that I'm trying to make. As that being said, I honestly think that this movie has a very good story. In concept, a lot of sci-fi movies or fantasy movies tend to go with the chosen one storyline. And without really spoiling anything at all, I will say that this movie does have a chosen one sort of storyline. I thought I knew exactly where it was going to go, and I was very pleasantly surprised when it didn't go the way I thought. So just keep that in mind. I would go more in depth, but it'd spoil it. And I'd honestly just highly recommend knowing, like, go into this, having done your research, having watched the original movie, specifically watch the final cut of Blade Runner. I don't know how good or bad the other ones are, but like, I'd rather not listen to Harrison Ford be bored while just narrating over the original 1980 movie. So whatever. And yes, I should mention that if that piqued your interest at all, yes, Harrison Ford is the main character of the first movie. And yes, he still plays a very significant role in Blade Runner 2049. So just keep that in mind. If you have no other interest from anything I just described, with none of the terminology nailed down, you should definitely watch it for Harrison Ford, is what I'm trying to say. Harrison Ford is definitely a selling point. Our movie has Harrison Ford. That's how Secret Life of Pets 2 got made in the first place. Aside from all the plot details that are honestly very solid, but unable to be like explained properly within about like 7 minutes, honestly, without taking up the entire time, I'd like to kind of transition over into some of the other aspects of this movie that I personally really like, namely the performance of Ryan Gosling. As I mentioned, Ryan plays the main character of this movie, a replicant by the name of Kay. He's basically a reenactment. He's a genetically modified robot that kind of resembles a human being, but isn't exactly a human being. Again, if you know the terminology, this all makes perfect sense. If you don't, this is confusing as all get out. But Ryan Gosling basically plays the main character that we follow throughout the entire thing. And so many people have made memes about him that he's become, it's not like a joke at all. People really like his performance. I honestly think it stands on its own without any memes or any internet culture references. Like, if you just take it at face value, it's a very good performance. And I think that's worth kind of highlighting. I could get up here and say, oh, I really like all those memes where people are like, oh, look at him. He's just like me, alone in he's forsaken in a world that doesn't want him. That's just like me. And I'd be like, I could say that, but I don't really want to. It's kind of dumb. And I'd much rather just look at his actual performance, which carries itself. Thank you very much. I should also mention that the biggest things that I remember from this movie are its use of color. The colors are vibrant, they're bursting, they're incredibly stylized, and the cinematography. Such good shots. Like, so many good shots in this movie. Too many to name, honestly. But the best thing about these two elements, they don't overlap or kind of intrude on the story or the character development or anything else having to do with the actual movie. They just sort of are nice accompaniment to the actual movie. And so big shout outs for that. I honestly could talk more about Blade Runner 2049, but we've got bigger fish to fry. So we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we are going to jump into Dune Part 1 from 2021. So stick around. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays, and for our second movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to take a look at Dune Part 1 from 2021, whatever, available to watch on Max or HBO Max, whichever one you want to call it. I personally prefer HBO Max because Max is a person's name. It is not the name of a streaming service. At any rate, so this movie was quite popular when it came out about 3 years ago, which feels like a long time, but in the grand context of movies that I normally review on this show, it's kind of just a drop in the puddle, to be completely honest. I review movies from the 1950s, so it's not that old. Come on, guys. Anyone who was born in the same year is only about 3 years old. They haven't even, like, there's a good chance they aren't even walking yet. You're not old. You're not old. I'm telling this to myself. I haven't heard anyone reference themselves as old in reference to this movie. It's a weird joke that I'm only understanding. At any rate, Dune Part 1 is the story and adaptation of Frank Herbert's original Dune novel. Very popular book these days, what with the sequel coming out. But the original story is about Paul Atreides, the son of this, like, very rich family known as House Atreides. While in the distant future, they visit a planet, Arrakis, that they have been given by the Emperor to rule over, and taken the control away from the Harkonnen family, their sort of biggest rivals in terms of the rich royal families who all have nothing better to do than buy planets from each other, honestly. Get a life, guys. Come on, you got nothing better to do? You just want to buy a planet? I don't know where I'm going with that tangent. But once getting to Arrakis, Paul is essentially attacked by the Harkonnens. His entire family is. And he has to flee and fight alongside the Fremen, the native species on planet Arrakis, in order to sort of find his destiny and reclaim the planet for the Fremen, because he sympathizes with them. Now, again, on the high level, that is the basic plot of the movie. I may have given away some of the stuff near the end, but that is the basic premise of the book. But, and this is a very big but, it's the general premise, because the book itself is very notorious for having multiple pages describing things like political intrigue, personal like monologues, just overabundance of information, a massive world. It's essentially the sci-fi version of Lord of the Rings. Like, they had to condense stuff down significantly in order to get it to fit into a movie. And keep in mind that this is part 1 of 2, covering the first book. So in comparison to Lord of the Rings, it's honestly like so much bigger. Like, because they managed to do like 3 movies of Lord of the Rings. Yes, they were all like 3 hours long, but in combination, you've got like about 6 to 6.5 hours of movie. With Dune, like, they're up to about 4, and they've just covered 1 book, okay? And there's like at least 2 other books in this series. So that should really give you a good idea of how dense this story is by comparison. But that brings up a good point, which is, if you aren't able to read the book, or you just don't want to, I think the movie gives you enough to go off of that you could go in blind and still maybe figure things out. But it really does make a lot of sense, and it fits together nicely. There's no real conflicts or anything at all if you read up just the basic premise of the storyline and kind of go in with like at least a little bit of knowledge. If you have just the bare minimum, the movie makes a lot of sense. It connects right in your brain, and you won't really have a hard time figuring out who's who, because they'll bring up the names. They'll go, oh, here's Paul Atreides, here's his father, Leto Atreides, here's the Harkonnens, here's the Fremen, here's what they look like. You can't necessarily get lost. And I know this because like I rewatched this movie recently, and it took me about like 20 minutes into the movie to go, oh, right, I think I remember basically everything about this now. Cool. And it's been 3 years. So it's only dense in the sense of there is a lot of information and a lot of other stuff that they are cutting out. But knowing just the basic premise of it, you can really easily just jump into it. So it's not as dense as Lord of the Rings, even though it is technically more dense. It feels a lot less like there's a lot less species. That's the biggest thing. It's mainly the humans, and it's the Atreides and the Harkonnen, and then there's the Fremen. With Lord of the Rings, you've got things like dwarves, elves, wizards, hobbits. Like, it's a long enough list where you go, okay, I got to figure out all of this stuff. With Dune, it's like, okay, here's the big things I just got to remember. So good on them. The biggest advantage I think this movie has is, despite its scale and the amount of things it has to cover and sort of get the audience up to speed on, its pace is very fast moving, and it never feels overwhelming. It feels like you can kind of keep up with it as it moves along at such a brisk pace. And I think that's a good thing as well, because if they were just kind of slow and plodding with the entire thing, people would get bored very quickly. It's very much a, yes, we're going to adapt it accurately. We're going to give you all of the big information. We're going to give you all of the major details, but we're also going to keep this fast enough so that you, if you're a general audience member who's never read the book, you're at least still entertained the entire time. So good on them. I will also say that the casting for these movies has been like massively hyped up. You've got people like Timothy Chalamet. So I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I feel like if I had it like in front of me, I could pronounce it. But even then, I'm not even positive that I would be able to. I feel like there's an even lower chance that I'd be able to pronounce it even if I had it in front of my face. So I'm not even going to try. But they've also got Zendaya. They've got the first one has Oscar Isaac. They have Rebecca Ferguson. Like, there's some big names in these movies. Personally, I think my favorite character in both movies is Stellan Skarsgård, a very famous sort of Swedish actor. I think he's Swedish. If he isn't, I have made a horrible mistake, and I'm going to correct that very quickly by checking. But at any rate, I really like his performance as the leader. He is Swedish. Okay, I got that perfectly right. So Stellan Skarsgård. Wow. Stellan's acting is great as the head of the Harkonnens, the evil family. He's just so wonderful. I absolutely loved his performance over all of the others, and that carries over to the second movie. So big shout out to that. So now we're going to get into why I wanted to cover Dune and Blade Runner, which is Dune 2, which is currently out in theaters. That's the whole reason I'm breaking the rules. And the biggest thing I can say is stick around until after the break, where we'll jump into that. 88.1 The Burg, your Music Central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for our third and final movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at Dune Part 2 from 2024. Available now on the streaming service. Go watch it in the movie theater. That's the streaming service it's on. It's a real one. If you look it up, you can sign up now with your email address and pay about $11 a month to watch it on the Go Watch It in the Movie Theater streaming service platform. Now, full disclosure, this movie is still out in theaters. That's a new one. I don't think I've ever really done that kind of thing. I don't really review current movies. That's not a thing I like doing. Why am I doing it? Well, to be fully honest, it's really just because I wanted to. I personally did go and see this movie like last weekend. I was kind of tired of hearing everyone just talk about it. I was very annoyed with the fact that just basically every single person around me was just like, oh, you gotta go see it. It's so good. I was like, fine, I'll rip the Band-Aid off. Stop bothering me. I mean, it was also because I wanted to go see the movie, but that did play into it just a little bit. Just a little bit. I was like, I'll do it out of spite. Get off my back. So to really go into the plot details would A, spoil the first movie, and B, wouldn't really make sense because everyone kind of already knows where it's going. Or if you don't, you haven't seen the first one, why would you go and see the second one without having seen the first one? Especially for a story as complicated as Dune. Really, the only thing you actually need to know is that it's a continuation of the first movie. They kind of pick it up very recently after the first one ended. They're not like jumping ahead in time or anything like that. It's very recently after the fact. And so I think going in blind in terms of Dune, as in knowing the background of the story and knowing what the first movie did, is good enough preparation for watching the second movie. I honestly just kind of wanted to go over my opinions of the movie since it is such a new one. I don't think I could really like kind of unpack some of the some of the details of like, oh, here's what things looked very good. It's mostly because the hype is sort of diluting my ability to kind of look at it as more of a critic rather than a sort of audience member. Like I'm looking at it more of like just a basic audience enjoyer rather than someone who could pick apart things like that. And I'm also kind of afraid to really go diving deep into some of the critical stuff just because it's such a new movie and it's gotten so much hype around it that I feel like any amount will end up with my license revoked or something like that. I don't know. To be completely honest, I just have opinions. That's all I've got. I don't have like thoughts on the actual movie content itself or criticisms or kind of noticeable elements. I just kind of wanted to shout out some opinions. First one is that I really like the addition of Christopher Walken to the cast. As I said during the last movie's review, I really like the casting is like gotten high praise. Like people who are fans of the books have said like, oh man, the casting is so good. Like they nailed every single character. I really hope that's the case for Christopher Walken because I really like him as an actor and I really thought his performance stood out to the other ones, mostly just because I like Christopher Walken unabashedly, but it's also just like he plays this old emperor character. Again, not too much spoilers, but he's the emperor, and that character in particular is memorable for multiple reasons other than it's Christopher Walken. Of course, it's got Christopher Walken's accent, but he's such a major part of the story. And I'm just like, okay, now I get some questions answered. Now I get to know like what his deal is since he wasn't in the first movie. So high round of applause for that. I also honestly, like I should have mentioned it in the first movie's review, but I like how kind of open accessible words are failing me. How easy it is for the general public to watch the Dune movies is something to be celebrated. I honestly think that these movies are kind of an enigma in how successful they are, and yet Lord of the Rings was super successful, and so I don't think it's like beyond the realm of possibility. I was just kind of surprised when it was like announced in 2021 they were going to be making another Dune movie. A bunch of people were like, oh, this is going to be so cool, I'm really excited for this. And I was like, I thought it was kind of a cult thing. I thought I didn't really think it had like general appeal, and I was proven very wrong. People loved the first movie and people loved the second movie. So good on the public eye. They really are kind of changing up their tone just a little bit. I will say that when it came to the first movie and the second movie, the best decision I made, since it'd been a while since I'd seen the first one, was I rewatched it just before I was going to go see the second movie. I was like, okay, I don't remember the plot exactly, so I might as well just get back into it, see if I can remember stuff. That was a really good call because A, I didn't remember the plot as well as I thought I did, and B, I was reminded, oh yeah, these movies are so stripped back that it's not going to be difficult for me to remember where it goes. Part of my thing is that I also do know where some of the plot goes, especially after the second movie ends. At least in theory, I know because I saw the original 1980s version of Dune, the bad one. Basically, I saw the bad one, and it adapted more than just the first book, I think. Or maybe they just made up a bunch of plot points. I don't really know what happened with the old one. I think I actually intentionally avoided looking up what happened with the old one because it was so boring and bad that I didn't want to know. So that is a rant that is going to be saved for the What to Watch Weekends show, to be completely honest. This Saturday from 9 to 11 a.m., tune in to hear me talk about how bad the 1980s version of Dune is. And keep in mind, I haven't read the books. I have no attachment to Dune, and I was still bored out of my mind watching the original Dune, and I was still blown away by its accuracy and its ability to just nail everything with the newer movies. So it did something wrong. But I think that my biggest point about Dune Part 2 from this year, currently out in theaters, I think it is too early to call this movie the best one of the year. It is February. No, it's not. It's March, but it came out basically on March 1st. It was so close to February. especially this year since it's a leap year, like February 29th. It still felt like February when it was first released. It's too early. We are only 3 of the 12 months into the year. Stop calling it the best movie of the year already. I think we just need to wait until maybe April, and if no other movie has surpassed it by then, which I'm not necessarily doubting, I'm just saying let's wait maybe a month before we jump to that conclusion. I feel like 2024 has just started. I don't know. I feel like people should temper their expectations a little bit. I didn't fully temper my expectations, and I wasn't disappointed, but I felt like it definitely wasn't like the best movie of the year material automatically just for it being Dune. Okay? That's all I have to say. Don't worry. I still think it's good. I just don't think it's like perfect and amazing and like the best movie ever, man. I think it did a lot of things right, and I think it was very good, and I was entertained. But it's too early. It's too early to call it. It is just too early.